So far, we've talked about past and present social change and structure in rural America. In the remainder of this semester, it's time to look ahead. This week, we focus on possible futures for rural economies. With climate change and inequality accelerating, the global population growing and key natural resources dwindling, we can no longer ignore that human society is at a crossroads, and rural communities are at the heart of it. How are we going to move forward? How will rural communities respond to and shape these global trends? These are the questions that we confront this week. The idea that our decisions today affect our lives tomorrow are captured in the term development. As Philip McMichael points out in the reading this week, development is a highly controversial concept, rooted in the modernist assumption of progress that given the right actions, our life tomorrow will be better than today. Development has unquestionably improved the material standard of life for millions, but it has also exacerbated global inequality and environmental destruction. This calls into question the very promise of development, but the term is nonetheless used to capture the path a society can take to improve its situation. Before we engage with critiques of development, let's examine where rural development might take place. Broadly, there are two approaches to rural development. One that seeks to develop rural areas within a global structure that is assumed to be fixed, and an approach that focuses on transforming the global society to benefit rural communities. Let's consider the first approach. Rural development is often thought of as a response to global and national trends, including intensified economic competition, demographic change, or global warming. The Brown and Schaft chapter this week exemplifies this approach. It is assumed that there are inevitable changes that rural communities need to adapt to. For that reason, let's call this approach adaptive rural development. There are two general flavors of adaptive rural development. First, communities may choose to further integrate in the global economy and compete with other places for investments and human capital. This form of development aligns with the logic of global capitalism, but it is questionable whether it can improve well-being for all rural communities. If several adjacent communities lower their taxes and environmental standards to attract the next shopping mall or superfund site, these facilities will still only be built in one place. While neoclassical economists assume that competition fosters ingenuity and brings out the best in everyone, critics say that regional competition fuels a race to the bottom, in which even the winners lose out compared to the benefits that flow to the investors of capital. The second flavor of adaptive rural development attempts to insulate rural communities from global trends by strengthening their resiliency and autonomy. Here, communities invest in sustainable, locally controlled resources such as renewable energy, dependable social networks, healthy ecosystems, and closed economic circuits. There have always been communities that operate on this idea, ranging from peasant villages, Israeli kibbutzim, Britain's garden cities, American ranges, Amish and Mennonite communities, to the more recent eco-villages, transition towns, counterculture communes, and some more middle-of-the-road development plans. These examples aim to create local well-being without hindering other places from doing the same. Critics argue, however, that assuming that communities can isolate themselves from global and national developments is naive for three reasons. First, certain environmental changes such as global warming or upstream water pollution may affect communities to a point where they can no longer adapt. Second, certain environmental and economic conditions or disasters require cooperation across local boundaries, and those interregional arrangements that facilitate that. Third, as we have seen, economic autonomy is only possible when a community has a high degree of ownership over the means of subsistence production, which conflicts with the interest of economic elites to accumulate capital. With ownership over productive capital, including land, so unevenly distributed as in the United States, how are these resources to be transferred to local communities for predominantly subsistence use? As capital owners often live in metropolitan centers rather than rural communities, it is implausible that communities can achieve any kind of autonomy without social struggle with these remote capital owners. And this leads us to the third approach to rural development, which is no longer adaptive but rather transformative. This approach seeks society to change as a whole for the benefit of rural communities. Just how this may look like, of course, is up to your political preferences and priorities. For example, right-wing populists see the solution to international economic competition in closing national borders. Supporters of the Green New Deal propose to use public funds to build up a decentralized, renewable energy industry to create rural jobs and slow climate change. Socialists, on the other hand, demand land and other resources to be redistributed to the people who work them and live off them. As different as these ideas may be, they all assume that rural communities won't be able to thrive unless the entire society changes, not just rural areas. Now that we have identified the spaces in which rural development may occur, let us return to development as such. Development implies that human societies can improve their standard of living given the right circumstances and actions. That improvement, conceived as progress, can be linear, it can be cyclical, it can be natural, or it can be the outcome of intense social struggle, but it is always desirable. Yet, development and progress are also nothing more than ideas we tell ourselves. There's nothing natural or factual about one way of life being better than another. This contingency allowed critics to challenge the concept of development on various grounds. First, they argue that development has strong normative assumptions, meaning that it casts Western, consumption-heavy and individualistic lifestyles as superior to more self-reliant, community-oriented forms of living. Although a Western middle-class life may in fact be ideal for some, it can be culturally and spiritually poor for others. Second, development as practiced over the centuries has always favored the interests of particular classes. To the point that development has been equated with integration in capitalist markets, development accumulated capital in the hands of a few. For example, the colonization and proletarianization of indigenous peoples and peasants across the world has often been promoted as progress. Besides the blatant cultural imperialism of this assumption, the main beneficiaries of such development have been those who promoted it, not the peoples targeted to be developed. Third, assuming that development means economic growth and increased consumption has led people in so-called developed countries to consume more resources than our planet regenerates, and pollute it more than it can absorb. Did we take development too far? Based on these critiques, several authors attempt to rethink development. For example, there's the concept of sustainable development, which seeks to decouple economic growth from resource consumption. The landmark report Our Common Future by the United Nations Brundtland Commission defines sustainable development as development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. In the past, economic growth has been correlated with the consumption of non-renewable resources and emissions of greenhouse gases. The premise of sustainable development is to break that relationship so that the economy can grow in perpetuity. Critics point out that sustainable development is wishful thinking because any economy based on non-renewable resources and environmental pollution is inherently unsustainable. Another point of contention is that sustainable development tends to be silent on social dimensions of capitalist development, in particular regarding social inequality. Another example is the concept of human development, exemplified by the economist and Nobel Prize laureate Amartya Sen, among others. This school of thought seeks to expand development to include not only economic growth, but also immaterial means that people need to fulfill their capabilities, such as functioning social networks, healthcare, education, and others. For example, the United Nations suggests replacing the gross domestic product with the Human Development Index as the benchmark of development. For example, the United Nations suggests replacing the gross domestic product with the Human Development Index as the benchmark of development. This index combines a society's life expectancy and average years of schooling with the gross national product. Bhutan went even further and implemented a gross national happiness index. The GNH index is calculated from measures of economic sustainability and equity, environmental conservation, cultural life, and good governance. These different approaches of human development share a belief in progress as continuous societal improvement, but seek to measure it in ways that best represents human needs. Finally, there are numerous ideas that can be summarized as post-development. These ideas regard development as an ideology that global elites use to colonize the thinking and acting of the rest of the world. Post-development thinkers point out that development universalizes the norms of Western modernity to the detriment of other forms of life. Rather than continuously tinkering with established social systems, post-development seeks to conserve or establish social systems that are sustainable and fulfill people's subsistence needs without the constant need for further improvement. Many examples of post-development come from thinkers from the Global South and anthropologists, who find that many peasant and indigenous communities already fulfill the needs of their members on sustainable ecological footprints. For these communities, the main political project is not development, but protection against their integration in global markets. One model of post-development based in the Western academic tradition is degrowth, the proposition that highly developed industrial economies need to shrink for local communities to better and more sustainably fulfill the subsistence needs of their members. Ultimately, these different responses to mainstream development theory help us to formulate what we want to achieve by rural development. Are we working towards an idea that is truly our own, or something that we are told to desire? Before we develop anything, we must ask what world do we want to pass on to our children, and how do we get there without hurting others? And that is precisely what I ask you to do this week. Imagine a future in which rural people live dignified and fulfilled lives, regardless of their gender, race, or any other identity. How would it look and feel like? What would need to change for us to get there? What does rural development mean for you? Think about it, and see you next week.